Okay, we'll start with this. Well, as is customary here on Ring IQ, at the turn of the year, the beginning of it, the search for the next wave of talented boxers in the year of 2022 takes us to Sweden.
Gothenburg, Sweden.
Where an unbeaten up-and-comer that campaigns in the junior middleweight division is making ripples, making waves.
Keeping an eye on this fighter all throughout last year.
Because the junior middleweight division needs fresh faces.
The next generation of junior middleweights.
The landscape at 154 pounds is changing the way I told you it would all of 2020 and 2021. Titles have changed hands. There is a new crop of champions at 154 pounds. Henna Rankin holding the WBA, Patricia Bergult holding the WBC, Marie-Eve Dicaire holding the IBF.
For the time being, Clarissa Shields is still registered as WBO champion, but I'd wager that's going to change soon.
That title's going to go vacant, and somebody else is going to come along and pick it up, though.
We ain't here to talk about who's got a belt.
Unbeaten up-and-comers, prospects, are the topic of discussion here today in this segment. A young up-and-comer that goes by the name of Marianne Ahlborg.
Gothenburg, Sweden.
A Swedish national, the same as WBC champion Patricia Bergult.
Sweden's produced a lot of fighters over the years.
A lot of good ones. Clarice Venson, Michaela Lauren, Patricia Bergult.
Now Marianne Ahlborg takes center stage.
Marianne Ahlborg sports a professional record of 5 wins, no losses, no draws with 1 knockout. Having debuted as a professional in December of 2020, she fought 4 times since then, 4 times last year in the year of 2021.
She's fought 5 times as a professional total.
Marianne Ahlborg's base style is best described as a close quarters fighter. You guessed it, a mid-range to inside pressure fighter. And we all know how those pressure fighters tend to make things interesting. The junior middleweight division needs one as its resident pressure fighter.
Maria Lindberg, she's getting up there in age.
I don't imagine she's going to stick around the sport much longer, given her age, coming off her most recent loss to Henna Rankin at this weight. Marianne
Ahlborg is a close quarters fighter.
Pressure fighter that likes to come forward, stalk her opponent, and let the fists fly. She really commits to those shots, really commits to those looping shots.
Those overhand rights.
She is a bit rough around the edges at times, though with a professional record of 5 wins and no losses, that's expected. It's very early in her career. She's not a complete fighter just yet, but there are virtues there. There seems to be mustard on those shots and speed in those hands. There's explosivity.
This is a fighter that shows real promise at junior middleweight.
The other fighters, the other champions, like Henna Rankin, WBA champion, she's more of a boxer-puncher, and the same applies to Patricia Bergult. Marie-Eve Dicaire, she's more of a hit-and-not-get-hit, defensively-minded, pure boxer, whereas Marianne Ahlborg,
she's a close-quarters pressure fighter.
A mid-range to inside pressure fighter that's looking to do damage, throwing with bad intentions, thereby diversifying the landscape.
Diversifying the weight class.
And the weight class needs that kind of diversity. Fresh-faced fighters, a deeper talent pool, talent-rich division where you can mix and match the names and you'll get a good fight every single time. Marie Ahlborg of Gothenburg, Sweden is one to watch out for in the year of 2022, campaigning in the junior middleweight division, which isn't the deepest weight class, isn't the deepest division, but I feel like this fighter can shake things up in time, provided that the fighter is groomed properly and not rushed into any situations
that are perhaps ahead of schedule.
Marianne is one of several unbeaten up-and-comers integrating themselves into today's junior middleweight division. There is also the UK's own Elise Hopkins, Georgia O'Connor, who we've talked about here on the channel.
There's also Hannah Bagley,
Germany's own Hannah Hansen,
and Naomi Mans. This string of unbeaten up-and-comers, this next wave of junior middleweights are quickly populating these ranks and bringing diversity to this division, though it's Marianne Ahlborg that caught my eye most recently, and I think she is one to watch out for in the year of 2022. Moving on. Bob Arum said this in reference to Canelo Alvarez. He said,
"There haven't been any real conversations for Canelo versus Artur Beterbiev. I think they might want to fight Joe Smith Jr. next and then go to Beterbiev to unify the titles. They sort of hinted at that."
I imagine that Canelo's critics are hearing this and formulating their criticisms.
Those guys, they're never happy that Canelo Alvarez might be looking at a Joe Smith Jr. fight ahead of an Artur Beterbiev fight when If it's so easy to beat Joe Smith Jr., tell Jermall Charlo to move up and do it. Or David Benavidez. He's a big kid. He's a growing boy.
And it's not like he has a belt or anything. He could use one.
Guy's got to be tired of cutting all the way down to 168 pounds, given the size of him. That frame.
My guess is that the PBC kids are waiting for the reset button to be hit at super middleweight.
My guess is that the people over there at the PBC are waiting for those super middleweight titles to go vacant so that their fighters can fight for them, because I don't see any of those guys moving up to light heavyweight to fight anybody.
Canelo's critics, they're not going to be happy with anything.
Of course not. In their mind's eye, Canelo Alvarez should have fought Artur Beterbiev 3 or 4 years ago or something like that.
Ridiculous.
And the same applies.
It does.
If Artur Beterbiev in their mind's eye has all of a sudden become some kind of a pushover to where Canelo Alvarez deserves no credit for potentially taking him on, if it's so easy, then tell Jermall to do it. Tell David to do it.
Instead of fighting the fucking scrubs they've been fighting.
A bunch of fucking nobody.
They're so critical of whatever Canelo Alvarez does, yet they got nothing to say about those guys.
And we've been all through that. We've already had that conversation. As it stands, according to Bob, Canelo might end up fighting Joe ahead of Artur.
Excellent fights, the both of them.
Bigger, better, and more formidable than anyone that David Benavidez, Jermall Charlo, or Demetrius Andrade, for that matter.
Today's Joe Smith and Artur Beterbiev are better than anybody those guys are fighting.
Stop me when I tell a lie. What, Jason Quigley, Juan Montiel, and Tyrone Davis?
That's supposed to be better competition than Joe Smith and Artur Beterbiev?
These guys' criticisms of Canelo Alvarez have reached the point to where they don't even make sense anymore. They're simultaneously bashing Canelo, bringing up rehydration clauses and judges and performance-enhancing drugs, and the whole time they're actually advocating that their favorite fighters get a shot at Canelo when, if he's such a big fucking cheater, you should be advocating against the fight.
You should be happy that Canelo hasn't fought your guy.
Because if he does, all you're gonna do is bitch, moan, and bellyache about it.
Fucking idiots don't know what they want.
As far as I'm concerned, Joe Smith Jr. Artur Beterbiev in any order is all right by me, because those are the kinds of fighters that these other guys ain't fighting.
He's gonna use a rehydration clause.
Why the hell do you keep asking him to fight your fucking guy if all you're gonna do is complain about it?
Not even saying he is gonna use a rehydration clause.
To my knowledge, he didn't use a rehydration clause for Callum Smith, didn't use one for Avni Yildirim or Billy Joe Saunders or Caleb Plant.
Though if he were to try to implement one at light heavyweight...
Well, those guys up there have the option to reject it, though if they accept the terms of engagement, they accept the terms of engagement. You assume the responsibility of whatever happens after that.
Suck it up, bitch.
I like those fights. Joe Smith Jr., Artur Beterbiev, both naturally bigger guys than Canelo Alvarez, naturally bigger punchers than a lot of the guys that he's fought so far. Both pressure fighters, both mid-range to inside guys, though one is considerably more sharpened, more educated, applies more educated pressure than the other. That would be Artur Beterbiev. Though Joe is a close quarters pressure guy himself. That's what he does. Barrel forward, unloading.
Though he's a lot more crude than Artur.
And he's plenty tough, plenty durable, though he's not as big a puncher. For my money, Artur Beterbiev is a significantly bigger puncher than Joe Smith Jr.
But Joe can punch. I mean, he ain't pillow-fisted.
The difference between them, I think, is that Joe Smith Jr. is a lot more susceptible to counters because his work isn't as neat, isn't as tidy as Artur Beterbiev. Artur fires very short punches within close quarters. The kind of short punches that might be hard to counter because he doesn't leave himself out there for the counters. Whereas Joe really swings for the fences and commits to those shots. Creates situations to where a guy like Canelo, who'd have a speed advantage,
Canelo can evade and counter because he's smaller, because he's faster.
A campaign at light heavyweight, a campaign at 175 pounds, I think, would be a return for Canelo to his counter-punching ways. I think he'd have to do a lot more boxing against those guys than what we've seen from him at 168 pounds. He can't just pressure those guys at 175 the way he did the guys at 168 pounds. Let's make that crystal clear.
Can't just march forward in high guard letting those guys unload.
I think it'll be a lot harder to get the respect of a Joe Smith Jr. or an Artur Beterbiev. They're naturally bigger guys, bigger punchers, and they're durable. I don't know that Canelo Alvarez can actually stop these guys. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him.
So the punches a guy don't see that take a guy out.
I feel like Canelo Alvarez can land those shots. I feel like he's accurate enough, fast enough to get off those punches that those guys don't see. But is that really going to be enough to stop them? Is that really going to be enough to get their respect?
You let Canelo's critics tell it, and all these guys are supposed to be pushovers.
I guess that's why Canelo Alvarez is the only one daring to venture in these divisions where his critics' favorite fighters dare not go.
Cruiserweight or light heavyweight?
Yeah, I understand that Lunga Makabu isn't the very best of the best cruiserweights out there. He isn't, but he certainly isn't the worst. He is an active reigning champion, a full champion, whereas a guy like Jermall Charlo can't get a Juan Montiel out of there at middleweight.
Those cruiserweights are so easy to beat. Why don't Jermall and David move up there?
I mean, it stands to reason that if it's so easy to do, if it's as easy to do as Canelo's critics say it is, then why aren't their favorite fighters doing it? It'd certainly be more monumental, more historic than what they are doing. Finally, per tweet from Michael Benson, WBC President Mauricio Sulaiman on Tyson Fury versus Dillian Whyte. The 80-20 split comes from the purses the fighters have earned in their recent fights. The arbitration is still going on. We simply made the ruling, and that's where we are right now. This baseline purse.
This purse split.
You got a lot of Fury fans right now saying that Dillian Whyte only made something like $360,000 in his last fight, which mathematically makes no sense. If that's all Dillian Whyte made in his last fight...
This is based on a question that a reporter asked during the WBC's last convention.
That number didn't come from the WBC themselves.
Why would it? Mathematically, it makes no sense.
This baseline purse split is based on what the fighters made in their last fights. Now, Tyson Fury is estimated to have made somewhere between 25 and 30 for his last fight, whereas Dillian Whyte is estimated to have made roughly $4 million in his last fight. So what's 20% of $25 million?
$5 million.
$5 million, which is roughly what Dillian Whyte made in his last fight, just short of $1 million. $5 million, which is what Bob Arum and the people over there at Top Rank offered Dillian Whyte for the fight. So based on the fighters' purses in their last fight, the fighters' purses in their last outings, based on those purses, the determined split is 80-20, because Dillian got somewhere around 4, maybe a little more, and Tyson Fury got around 20 or 25.
That's how you get to the 80-20.
Not the least bit surprised that Tyson Fury's fanatics don't seem to know their way around a calculator.
These guys really think Dillian Whyte only made $360,000 in his last fight?
They're morons. They're fucking morons. Dillian Whyte has been making very good money over the years. So good that Oscar Rivas was able to pull in over $1 million, over $1 million payday just for fighting him years ago. So why the fuck would his purse only be $360,000 here today?
According to Oscar Rivas himself, he pulled in over $1 million payday for fighting Dillian Whyte.
So why would anyone believe that Dillian Whyte's purse were only $360,000 when his opponents seem to be getting paid very good money? They're getting paid that. What do you think he's getting paid?
And if Tyson Fury made around $25 million in his last fight,
if that's what he got, and the WBC's baseline purse split is 80-20, what's 20% of $25 million?
$5 million.
And what's the estimated number for Dillian Whyte's last price?
4, maybe close to $5 million.
That's how you get the 80-20, you fucking morons. It's because Dillian Whyte made a multi-million dollar price, a multi-million dollar payday in his last fight. So let's get that clear. Let's get that out of the way.
Now, if you're Dillian Whyte, you got 2 problems with this situation.
2 primarily. One is that this purse split is based on the fighters' last fights, and Dillian Whyte's last fight doesn't accurately represent his marquee value. It doesn't accurately represent it because there wasn't a big crowd in attendance. It was more or less fought in a bubble.
Over there on the Rock of Gibraltar.
And the fight before that, he fought on Eddie Hearn's lawn, whereas Tyson Fury's last 2 fights actually did have a crowd in attendance that did a very big gate.
A big crowd.
Dillian Whyte is a ticket seller. Make no mistake, he is. He's the guy who sold out the O2 Arena with Joseph Parker.
If you're Dillian Whyte, you know that your last fight doesn't accurately reflect your marquee value.
That's your first problem. Your second problem is that the guaranteed cash, the offer that's on the table for you, guaranteed part of it, is comparable to what you made in the bubble. Comparable to what you made on the Rock of Gibraltar. Now, this is a much bigger fight than either of the fights that Dillian had on Eddie Hearn's lawn and on the Rock of Gibraltar. So why are you offering this guy bubble money
and Rock of Gibraltar money for what you know is a bigger fight?
I see a lot of Tyson Fury's fans exercising a lot of cognitive dissonance, pretending that they don't know any better, pretending that they don't know this is a very hot ticket in the United Kingdom. This promises to sell a lot
This fight sells a lot of pay-per-views.
This fight will put more asses in more seats in the United Kingdom than any of the aforementioned alternatives we've heard in association with Tyson Fury. Fury versus Whyte does better business than Fury versus Helenius.
Fury versus Whyte in the UK is a bigger fight than Fury versus Ruiz in America.
Oh, I know that Tyson Fury's last two fights did very big gates, and there were a lot of people there, and a lot of pay-per-views got bought, and I understand that, but that was with Deontay Wilder.
We see what the Schwartz and Verleen numbers look like.
You remember what Tyson Fury's numbers looked like in America when he didn't have Deontay Wilder there as a dance partner, when he didn't have him there to help him sell the fight. Together, Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder, they sold some pay-per-views, they sold some tickets, they did, but separately...
The misconception here is that Tyson Fury can fight anybody and make it a hot ticket.
No, he can't, because the Tom Schwartz fight wasn't a hot ticket, the Otto Verleen fight wasn't a hot ticket. It wasn't until Wilder was reintroduced into the equation that we saw an uptick in the numbers. Now, I'm not telling you that Tyson Fury can't sell some tickets in the United Kingdom. He certainly can. I think he can. But there's a misconception here that he can go in there and fight anybody, just anybody.
No, he can't. He still needs a dance partner.
It sounds a lot like, even though the WBC has set a baseline purse split, that could change depending on what happens with the arbitration. Now, Dillian Whyte himself, hasn't had much luck with the WBC. They don't seem to be doing him any favors. They certainly haven't in the past. The 80-20 purse split comes from the purses the fighters have earned in their recent fights. The arbitration is still going on.
75-25 to 70-30 makes more sense.
If you want to get the fight done, that is. I'll go as far as saying that 65-35, if you want to get the fight done, makes a lot more sense than 80-20 with a guarantee of $5 million. But I've maintained my position throughout. I'm not convinced that either Frank Warren or Bob Arum want to get this fight done. What they want is a cheaper, safer alternative so that Tyson Fury isn't in a rough and tumble kind of fight ahead of what could be a fight with either Alexander Usyk or Anthony Joshua. What they are attempting to do is preserve him.
It's not that he can't beat Dillian. He probably can.
I say probably because this is the heavyweight division, folks. The one division that has always had an air of spontaneity. It all looks a certain way on paper until the night of the fight.
And even if you win the fight, that doesn't mean you didn't get banged up in the process of having it.
You ask me what I think is going on, and I'm not convinced that Frank and Bob really want this fight. What they want is a cheaper, safer alternative.
And that's what I think is going on.